co-hosts, Dr. Victor Fett, Dr. Katerina Shrey, and our program producer, Professor Larry Sherey. We host a weekly panel on Russia's war on Ukraine with guests from Ukraine, military experts, medical personnel, academics, artists, literary figures, and relief workers. Our panel is recorded and circulated nationally and internationally. We appreciate your comments and feedback. Special thanks to Marshall University Libraries and MUIT for making this weekly event possible. If you are joining us live on Teams, please feel free to use the chat to post any questions for our guests. A quick greetings to our viewers in Ukraine from Professor Katerina Shrey.
Вітаємо наших слухачів в Україні з глибоким покліном. Ми далі свідки вашого страшного терпіння і також вашої великої сили. Дякую вам за вашу участь в нашій тижневій програмі.
Thank you. Today's guest will be introduced by Professor Victor Fett.
Thank you, Anara. I am honored to introduce here Frank Hickey, who joined us from Odesa, Ukraine. And he is the U.S. citizen working in Ukraine right now. And in my announcement, I allowed myself to refer to his writings on Amazon. He's also a published novelist, but Frank will introduce himself and tell us about his work. Please, Mr. Hickey. Microphone is yours.
Frank, I'm honored to be here. Thank you all for inviting me here. I'm Irish Jewish American, not Ukrainian American, and that causes a lot of people to ask me why I'm here. I'm here because the war is wrong, and I want to do everything I can that is not illegal or fattening to help the people who are affected by the war. And I think flexibility is the key in these matters, so I would rather field questions from you all rather than talk at length about a half hour or so. If you have questions, please ask me the question. That's all right with you, Victor. Can you hear me now?
We hear you. You're breaking out a little bit from time to time. Right now,
as I mentioned to you, the Wi-Fi in this area is sometimes not good. It's sometimes not good in my hotel. It's part of the hotel's charm. There's nothing we can do about it. What do you want to do if we are interrupted by an air alert? Do you want me to stay in the room or go to the shelter? I always go to the shelter.
Please go to the shelter and do what is best for you, and we will manage here on this side.
All right. The shelter has Wi-Fi. And so we probably will be able to continue talking while I'm in the shelter. We have here, on the average, 2, I would see, air alerts per day. And sometimes they happen in the middle of the night. And they never seem to happen when it's a good time. There's never any good time for an air alert. And they happen, as I say, frequently. You have any questions for me right now about living in Odessa under these conditions?
I would like to share a map of Odessa just so that our viewers can see where we're at. So if it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And if you can sort of, just to kind of, while I'm doing that, if you could tell us a little bit about the city, what brought you specifically to this city, and as an observer, what have you been to this city before? Do you know anything about it prior to the war? That kind of stuff. And while you're just telling us a little bit about Odessa before we get into questions how it's been affected by the war, I'm going to show as soon as I can call this up, a map of Ukraine to show our viewers where Odessa is.
Of course. I grew up in Brooklyn, which always had a sizable Russian population, especially along the beach areas of Coney Island and Brighton Beach. Every Ukrainian I have met seems to know about Brighton Beach and Coney Island. And I knew that Odessa was on the Black Sea and a cultured, vibrant town. And that always interested me. And I had never been here before the war. I'd never been to Ukraine before the war. But when the war began, I decided to come. I first went to Poland, worked there for months with refugees, and went to then Israel and then Moldova, and finally here in Odessa, where I've been living and working for 5 months now.
Thank you. What, like, how is the general mood in Odessa? Are the people optimistic? Are the people hopeful, scared? And I understand you can't paint everybody with a broad brush. But what has been your interaction with the folks living in Odessa so far? We may be having some Wi-Fi problems. Well, Mr. Hickey.
Yes.
Yeah.
If Frank, if you can hear us, you're frozen right now.
Victor,
And yes,
Victor, you actually summered in Odessa with your grandparents, correct?
with my parents, and my father was born there. Frank is alive back.
Great.
Please, Frank.
Frank is alive and back on the phone. Yes.
Yes,
We had an
please.
interruption there.
Sure.
We knew of it as a cultural, happy beach kind of city, and near the Moldova border, and that interested me, all of that, and I decided to come here and work as a volunteer, which I've been doing.
We can see on the map the relative proximity of Odessa to Mykolaiv, Kherson, Melitopol, and all these areas that have been in the news for
Yes.
tragic things in the news. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. And as a volunteer, what does your daily work look like? As a volunteer, what do you do? What is your routine when you get up in the morning to what your day's like? Or is there such a thing as a typical day for a volunteer?
I began working in a rag factory, as I called it, cutting rags to make camouflage nets to protect our soldiers on the front line. The color of the rags would change depending on the land, whether it was white, gray for snow, brown for woods, or greenish for grassy areas. And I've been teaching English to people here that want to learn. My students range from the age of 7 to the age of women in their 60s or so. I blend the English lessons very informally with current events in America. They ask me questions about it. Many of them have never been on friendly terms with a policeman, as I was for most of my working life. So they ask questions about that. And we discuss really everything under the sun. There's no paperwork involved, no written test. We talk, and I try to improve their grasp of the English language. And it's very challenging sometimes, but I find it very rewarding. And I was a terrible student in school. I find that I enjoy teaching. Now it comes to me in my later life. What a surprise. I'm also working in a kitchen where we're preparing food for different refugee groups that come in. I was doing that today. I do that a regular 5 times a week, every day. And teaching, that comes to 4 days a week. So it's pretty full. And I do whatever I can. Also, while teaching the English, my classes are primarily women because the men are in service at the front lines. I teach women how to protect themselves physically in the street.
Oh, wow.
Using, well, it's useful for everybody to know in war and in peace, especially in this war, where we know that mass sexual attacks happened 3 hours east of here in the Kherson region. And they enjoy that. It's something they've never done. And it's things that I learned as a policeman, working in some of the worst places in America, where I was constantly frightened. And I'm also teaching them ballroom dancing as a way to get everybody to forget the war from time to time when they're in my room, learning. And I use cartoons to brighten the mood and comedies to teach them English expressions. That is my daily round. That's what I do.
Well, it sounds like you're ministering to people on all levels, to their physical, to their body needs, to their intellect needs, to their spiritual needs, and to their emotional well-being. You are ministering to at every level of human need. Thank you. Thank you for using your time, your talents, your treasure to support the people of Ukraine during this horrible time. I see there's some great questions in the chat. So I'm going to yield to Victor to call on whoever's in the chat to step forward with their questions. There's some really great questions in the chat.
Yes, please. Dr. Deutsch, who is our former Dean of Graduate College at Marshall University. Len, you can open your camera. You can ask your questions, please.
Yeah, Frank, you had mentioned that you might have to leave at any minute to go to a bomb shelter. How much bombing is actually occurring in Odessa these days?
That's difficult to say directly. 2 days ago, a work companion of mine told, I knew about the air raid, the air alert that had happened. He told me from his window, he saw flashes. He doesn't know if that was debris or direct hits. It's hard to say. Every day I drive in a bus past a building that's been demolished by rocket attacks. It's not far from where I live, not far enough. And when I was dancing more regularly in the summertime, when the Black Sea Initiative, a lot more rockets at Odessa during that time, and they blew out the windows of my ballroom dancing place, which brought it home to me very sharply. I don't try to ask people every day about what happened the night before. I'm in the business of trying to make them forget that. And it's hard to say how much damage there is. I have been in my hotel room and I've heard the alarm and I've decided, well, am I going to go to the shelter or not? Then I hear a loud noise nearby and that makes a decision for me. I'm going to the shelter. The first time it happened, it was in July and it was very frightening. And since then, I make it a point, I'm going to the shelter.
Are the shelters set up for is there one shelter per like a building? Is there like a general shelter for the area? I take it this is in your hotel. There's a shelter in your hotel. Do you run into the same people there? There's what is the most people like you, they hear the alarms, they'll go to the shelters. It become kind of routine. If you formed almost like friendships over the kind of like absurdity and scariness of the situation?
That's a very good question. In July and August, when the air alert sounded, there would be people in the shelter with me. And it's just a room in the basement of the hotel. Nothing fancy, nothing heated, nothing particularly attractive. You don't want to spend any more time in there than you want to. No guests are ever in that room as guests. And after July and August, practically nobody goes to the shelter except me. Sometimes families with children will bring them to the shelter. I would say that happens once every 3 weeks. Usually I'm alone in the shelter. And when I was there and there were people there, I would speak to them. I would bring popcorn. I wanted people to remember happy times. Popcorn we associate with the movies, going to the movies I do, and you try to lighten the mood. More people will gather in the lobby of my hotel, but that's on the street level with plate glass windows. And I feel safer in the bomb shelter, which is a floor underground, where I can write. As Victor will tell you, I write every day and send the documents, the emails, my own views on what daily life is like. I send them to anyone in America naive enough to give me their email address. That's politicians, journalists, policemen I've worked with across America, friends in India, friends in China, around the world, just so they have a voice. They remember that the war is still going on here. And as I say, I try to write them every day. Often I write them in the bomb shelter.
There's another question in the chat, also from Dean Deutsch, and it's an interesting question. How Russocentric is Odessa? And there's several good questions here. So that's the next one. I'm going to actually, Dean Deutsch, I'm going to step back and just let you ask your own questions, but we'll start with that one. How Russocentric is Odessa? What is?
Yeah, I was just going to say that Odessa has the reputation of being, or used to of being the playground of the Russians, that they would vacation there, and presumably a substantial number of them decided so nice to stay there. So is there a kind of friction between those who are see themselves as Russian in background as opposed to the Ukrainians? How is that part going?
There's no friction that I'm aware of. My Russian is very rudimentary. I've only been speaking it for 5 months. It's not a language you can learn in 5 months unless you're supernaturally talented, and I'm not. I don't see or hear of any friction between the groups. I hear almost every hour, I hear Russian. I don't usually hear Ukrainian. The only time I hear Ukrainian that I'm certain of is when I'm in church and half of the service is in English and the other half, the readings of the gospel, etc., are in Ukrainian. And I have met senior government officials here who have been here for 30 years, and they do not speak Ukrainian. They only speak Russian. That surprised me. I mean, how do you work in a city for 30 years or so, have a senior position, and not speak the native language? But in terms of friction, I'm not aware of any.
Probably I need to add here for our viewers and listeners that Odessa was mostly predominantly Russian-speaking city, but housed enormous diversity of ethnic groups from older times, from before Soviet Revolution, Greeks, Jews, even Italians, Tatars, and Ukrainians, of course, who mostly were living in the countryside outside of the city rather than being city folks. And a lot of Jewish population, like my grandparents, they have left. And of course, everyone here on our side knows what Frank mentioned as Brighton Beach, Little Odessa nickname. Probably easy 50,000 to 100,000, I don't know, immigrants from these parts of Ukraine. But it's true that this was predominantly Russian-speaking city due to its history. So my question is, you hear Russian, just to make it clear for our viewers, you hear Russian around yourself, as you said, but it does not mean that these Russian-speaking folks identify them with Russian Federation as in the country which wages the war.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't try to get into political discussions. I didn't come here for that. I would be a terrible political reporter or a terrible journalist in that respect. I came here to help people and do everything I can to make them feel better about the horrible situation. But you're correct in what you say. I hear Russian all the time. I'm sure most people can speak both. I don't know of anybody who identifies himself as saying, I'm pro-Russian, I'm pro-Putin, et cetera, et cetera. But once again, I try to steer clear of political arguments.
This is wise, although it's hard for us to imagine how it can be so in the midst of the war. Any more questions from whoever is here live, please?
Yes. So you mentioned you came there to help, and I have recently, over the holidays, spent some time with family who go back and forth to Ukraine quite often, but they go back and forth to Western Ukraine, where our family is. And I was surprised how much harder it is to come to Ukraine. So, for example, it used to mean I've flown into Kiev, taken a train to Lviv. I've flown into Lviv. It's in the years ago. I was surprised to hear from my family that it is difficult. You have to go, and I forget what this. There's two routes basically, neither which is direct. How was your travel? Your physical, your ability to get to Odessa? Was it a complicated trip? Was it fairly straightforward? Like, how did you physically get? Where did you land in Poland? Take a train? Did you land at, like, how did that work out?
I flew to Chisinau in the country of Moldova.
Moldova, yeah, okay.
And from there, it's only a 4-hour bumpy bus ride past some beautiful scenery, farmhouses, farm fields, to get into Odessa from there.
Okay. Okay. There's Odessa at one point at least was known as a culinary capital, like a foodie destination. Does that make sense? I mean, not now, of course, not now, but do you see remnants of that? Does that sound right?
There's an excellent Chinese restaurant not far from where I live. I've gone in there, spoken with the boss in Mandarin, which I speak very badly, and the food is authentically Chinese. There are a lot of Italian restaurants, really Italian restaurants. It is quite diverse.
I'm going to show you a picture of like a very like a touristy type of picture that we associate here in the West. I've never been to Odessa. I've been to many parts of Ukraine, but Odessa is not one of them. I'm going to show you a picture. So obviously pre-war, obviously touristy. This is meant to attract people to Odessa. Is this kind of your view of Odessa? Is this what it still looks like? Does this picture make sense to you?
Yes, it does. My first day here, I walked to the Black Sea and found it enchanting. I've written that sometimes when I go to the beach, I feel guilty enjoying the beach in the middle of a war, but we all do that. And I went swimming in the Black Sea on the 2nd of January, and I wasn't alone. There were other people braving the water at that time. And there is a beach culture here, very much like Brighton Beach, Coney Island, with good restaurants on the beach and people enjoying it every day. So that is a true picture of Odessa.
Thank you. Thank you. It is weird, the surrealness of being able to go to the beach while there are bombs dropping 50, 60, 70 miles away. It's bizarre.
I go to the ballet here, and they announce in English and in Ukrainian and in Russian that if there's an air alert and it's halfway through the performance, we will go to the shelter. If it's it's 3/4 of the way through the performance, you're sorry, no refund. But if it's half, you go to the shelter and we'll refund the money for the tickets. And the opera and the ballet are packed with people, and they seem to be enjoying it. As otherwise, if you obsess on the war, you're not helping anybody.
I have maybe an unusual question, but you're the world traveler. Odessa in my life was the first European city I saw, because there are some, I grew up in Soviet Union, but Moscow, where I have been, cannot be called really in earnest a European city. So Odessa, when I came with my parents first when I was 8 years old, was modeled over Paris and Vienna when it was built by French and Italians. Do you still feel this? Do people there appreciate this?
Yes, they do. And as you say, the buildings look much more like France and Italy, both of which I lived and worked in, and they reflect the architecture. It is not the typical Soviet block-style buildings that are ugly and have no character. Where I'm staying in Odessa has enormous amounts of character, individual buildings. You can see the artist's hands all the way. And I'm not living in an expensive area at all, but it's very democratically built. You can enjoy it very much, and we do.
Thank you. We also know from history that Odessa very often under the Russian Empire was called the third capital and the only capital after Moscow and St. Petersburg, and the only large city which actually had the access to the warm southern sea. and this is still its geopolitical role. So we know that it is not occupied, and we know that activities continue, the maritime activities, the traffic, the port is working. So is this felt in the city, that it is still a vibrant sea gate?
Yes, very much
Okay,
so.
say.
I first came here, I read up on the early days of the war, and I knew that Russia had attempted an amphibious assault on Odessa, including the attack on Snake Island, which became a rallying phrase when the Russian warship said, "We are the Russian warship. We want you on Snake Island to surrender," where the Ukrainian command responded in a word I can't use on YouTube, very definitely saying, "No, we're not surrendering." And that became a rallying cry here. That was explained to me by my coworkers my first month when I was here. So Odessa was in danger of being taken, because if you take Odessa, you have the seaport, and you can stop, as stopped in some ways, from what I know, stopped grain going to Africa and Asia. But they did not invade Odessa, and some parts of the port you can't walk to. Very nice soldiers with Kalashnikovs have warned me not to walk there, that it's forbidden. And also there are signs along the beach area, do not take videos or pictures. For that reason, I believe there are probably still mines floating in the Black Sea, and there is that feeling of danger in it. But at the same time, as you say, it remains a vibrant city, people enjoying themselves, people having a good time in the cafes and on the streets. It's easy to forget that it's war.
Thank you. And I forgot to ask, what made you come to Odessa other than any other Ukrainian city?
Well, as I said, I felt comfortable knowing the history of the culture of it, the fact that it is the warmest city, from what I know, in Odessa, in Ukraine. I hate cold weather. I spent too long working in Germany and living in New York and New England to enjoy cold weather. Some people do, I don't. And that made it more attractive to me. And once I said, it's the city that I knew a lot of secondhand growing up in Brooklyn. There's a saying in Brooklyn among Russian and Ukrainian people, if you don't like it here, go back to Odessa, which all over the boardwalk in English, all up and down the Coney Island boardwalk. And so that resonated with me. I knew about the violinist, I believe Ephraim Zimbalist Sr. was from Odessa, and many writers, many artists were. I was born a writer of some kind, and that made it also more interesting for me to come here. There's a statue near of here of different writers, Tarashenko, I can never pronounce the last name.
Oh, Tarashenko.
Da. Это. Yeah. Должен вспомнить это. I have to learn how to say it better. And Isaac Bashevis Singer and Pushkin. The Pushkin Street is all over here with the Pushkin House. So that made it comfortable for me to come here to try to help out.
You mentioned your coworkers, are there volunteers there from other countries, from other places? And if so, are they Americans? Are they from Europe? Who else is out there helping alongside of you?
I have met only a couple of Americans here. The other volunteers are usually from Kherson region, and they themselves are refugees.
Oh, wow.
They want to get where they were. I have not met many other foreigners. I would say maybe 4 Americans total in the 5 months I've been here. Not more than that. And nobody from, one from France, another volunteer. And that's, I believe, it. I'll probably think of others after we finish the interview, but not a huge crowd of foreign volunteers.
I want to share my screen again just to show our viewers the proximity of, oh, I think I shared the wrong screen, of Odessa to Snake Island. So here we have Odessa, where you are, and in not too far right there, Snake Island. Obviously, we all know that it's in the Black Sea, but just to give our viewers a perspective of where it is with regard to where you are and some of these other places. And there is just now Moldova, where you flew into, and I could see where the trip would be right there.
Talking about this, we have a question in chat. Did you need any permission to come into the country? Were you vetted in some way?
I just showed my American passport, as I've traveled a lot, as you mentioned before. It was a slow process getting in, just because the customs officers had a lot of people to process on the bus. But no difficulty.
How do people react to you when they know you're American? Are you hearing, like some of our guests in Ukraine will tell us that, people are very grateful for America's support. People are asking for America's support. How do people react to you when they hear you're an American?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm from a show business family in New York. My mother was an actress. My sister's an actress. My other sister is a TV journalist in New York for 40 years, which we could agree is show business. And when my volunteer group asked me, when we had a new American-Ukrainian flag brought in, they asked me to sing something. So I sang the World War I song, Over There, by George M. Cohan, where America used it as a rallying point to get troops to help Europe. And I said, the same problem goes on now. We need Americans helping Europe now. And I follow that up with singing Slava Ukrania, which I've only learned the first chorus of. I think there's 3 choruses of it. I'm waiting for more energy to do the second 2, but I've been singing the Slava Ukrania song for more than a year, in Ukrainian, of course. And I try to tell people, when I don't understand what they're saying to me, I will say New York. Я не можно понимать по-русски добре. Я волонтер. Я должен помогать беженец. Это война. I'm here to help the refugees from the war. I'm kind of waving the flag as a low-income volunteer, no-income volunteer, because I don't want them to feel that they're alone. And they react very positively. Everybody knows the word New York. If they don't know New York, they know Brighton Beach, but they know New York. And I find that almost everybody under 40 speaks some English, and they're shy about it. They may be modest. They say to me in perfect English, "I'm sorry, sir, I don't speak English well at all." I say, "You speak it better than half the people in New York." But everybody can get along with some English, but I'm learning Russian as best I can, as quickly as I can, to be more useful in all my work.
You mentioned the Slava Ukraini song. So I actually don't know what that is. I know that the Shenev Merla Ukraina, the national anthem, but when you say 3 verses, I actually don't know what that is. What's the gist of that? Or maybe I do know what it is and don't recognize the title. Slava Ukraini. I'm trying to think. There's a couple of hymns often sung at the end of Mass, asking for God to bless Ukraine. But what is the Slava Ukraini song?
I heard Ruslana sing it on YouTube at the beginning of the war. If you will indulge me, it starts out like, Che nam Ukrania, ni slava, ni voля.
Is that it? Does that sound right?
I think
Or did I completely mess you up and throw you off?
No, the second line of that was Che brati Ukrainici uzmignet siadolya. You didn't, yeah, and that's where the song ends for me. But I use it as a rallying point, and to know a lot of American journalists and politicians are curious about why I'm here when I have no Ukrainian roots. I tell them very simply, this is a fight for everybody's freedom in the world.
Yeah.
This is Bunker Hill. This is the Alamo.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you are so right about that. That song is the Ukrainian national anthem, and it is very beautiful. And it is a song of resilience. Literally, the first one, Ukraine is not yet defeated, not yet dead, is literally what it says. And so thank you for learning it. Thank you for singing it. Anara Taplishayeva, our opening host, has her hands up, and so I'm going to go yield the microphone to her, and I'll be back in a bit. Hi, Anara.
Hello. Thank you very much for your nice, actually, presentation. And indeed, Odessa is a melting cultural pot, maybe compared to New York. And Odessa is well known for its particular humor style, jokes. And if you notice this as a writer, that they have some actually undeniable, interesting style, and that another my question, the second question, do you have your website, Instagram, or something to where we can read your writings or your stories?
The stories I'm sending to Victor and to Galina Iskovich. You can ask them, they will forward them to you. I don't put the stories on Facebook at this point. I send them directly to the people that I know. And I know hundreds of people, so it's kind of a distinction without a difference. And that's what I do. And hoping that rather than a massive email group, I will send them individually to people that I know, either through messenger chats or email. As you know, the chats is a lot easier, but email you can do with everybody, people you've just met for 10 minutes or so. And some of them are faithful readers. These are people I've known, some of them since I was a boy in high school.
Good. So, and my first question, as a writer, did you notice a particular humor style, a culture of the oral jokes in Odessa?
Yes.
Because Odessa is well known for this actually unusual tradition.
Yes, Anara. Scientists tell us that 90% of human communication is without words. I've written that in my notebooks when I traveled through Asia in the native languages and shown that to people, and it's very true. As I tell my students, I can tell when a bus driver is having a bad day by how he drives the bus, how close he comes to the curb, how long he allows the door to stay open for me to jump on board, how he pulls away from the curb. You don't need words for this. And it's the same way with the famous Odessa humor. And when I was working in close proximity with different groups, I see it all the time.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and I imagine your ability to read body language and nonverbal communication comes in very handy as an author. You have the Max Royster series, and I just put your there's a little blurb about you on the web, and I just put that into the chat as well for our live viewers. You also apparently co-wrote a movie that starred somebody who was in The Sopranos. It is interesting how your professional career as in law enforcement and your powers of observation, come in handy in many ways to how they kind of dovetail back together in order for you to not only be a member of law enforcement, but also a prolific author. And so that's quite wonderful. That's quite wonderful.
I'm a writer who became a detective, not the other way around.
Seriously, for real, really?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
I've been writing stories since I was 10 years old, and they were pretty bad, but I kept writing them. And when I was younger, I had leukemia. I was born prematurely. My eyesight was very bad. So I would find that I lost my parents when they went 20 feet away from me. I never had an eyesight test. So I learned to find people by how their bodies moved rather than seeing their faces at a distance. And that probably helped me following people and being more aware of how they move. I also grew up dancing, ballet, ballroom dancing, etc. So you get a feeling more for how people move rather than the details of faces and eye colors. So that all melded together. My eyes have gotten a lot better. One of the joys of getting older.
Wow, that's great. That is great. Oh, Victor, you're muted.
Thank you. There is so much we would like to ask, but I see some guests joining us live. Maybe they want to ask a question from Frank. We see some regulars or people who are coming sometimes to our podcast. Please open your microphone and ask if you have a question. Len is again asking, uh, how can we support? Yes, how can we provide support for those who are not brave enough, for those of us who are not brave enough to come to Odessa in person?
I do nothing brave or dangerous, Victor. I do this because it's the right thing to do. I'm not a brave guy. I've worked with brave men and women for years. I know the difference. Every Ukrainian I've spoken to says that America should send more aid. That seems to be the mantra. I agree with it. I keep an open mind and hopefully an open face, neutral, when they tell me this. I agree. This is a worldwide struggle. This is like America turning its back on World War I and World War II, which, if you know your history, we did 3 years in World War I and 2.5 years in World War II. Presidents were elected, Wilson and Franklin Roosevelt, on the basis of not getting involved in the European wars. So America, unfortunately, tragically, has the tradition of staying out of these struggles and later coming back to them when the enemy has gotten much stronger.
Well said. That's very well said.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Thank you. Galina Itzkovich sends her greetings on chat. Galina was a regular contributor to our podcast, and she introduced us to Frank. She writes, "I'm delighted to send through you my love to my hometown, Odessa, writing from your hometown of Flatbush. Thank you for your generosity and courage."
I'd like to, if it's okay,
I
just
hope to see her when I get back to New York. We'll have a cup of coffee together.
share a quick picture of you. This is you, I think, helping at a soup kitchen, perhaps in Ukraine, right? This is from May 2022.
Let's see. I think I've lost the connection. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, but I don't think we can see you. Oh, now we can see you. Yes, on the screen right now, I think this is a picture of you with some fellow relief workers.
Yes.
Near. So tell us a little bit about this. Like, who set this up? Is this something that you came into that was already organized? What's going on in this picture?
I came there directly from New Mexico, where I was working as a detective, and this is taken in the town of Przemyśl on the Polish-Ukrainian border. It was the first train stop after Ukraine in Western. It was the first train stop in Poland after Western Ukraine, and I spent 2 months there working with the organizations, providing safe shelter for refugee women, children, and men, carrying luggage from the trains, doing translations, and generally making myself helpful along with the other 2 workers you see in the picture with me.
Oh, wow. And that's very early. That's still May 2022. So this is very early into Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Thank you. It's when you said earlier, this is the right thing to do. Thank you so much for that attitude. Thank you so much for that wisdom. So we are in West Virginia, and one of our state senators, Joe Manchin, is very adamant about how important it is to help Ukraine now, like, and that we should have actually done more. Because as you point out, sometimes when you enter the conflict much later, it is a much more difficult conflict to resolve. And so thank you for your wisdom there. And we're just praying for a good outcome. I see Carol Smith is typing in the chat. Carol is a friend of our program. She is, her field is mental health. And she posts, "How did you establish yourself as a volunteer in Odessa? It doesn't sound like you're with an organized volunteer effort. How were you accepted and allowed in?" And Carol, if you want to open your camera and follow up verbally with this, that is great too, but that's a great question.
Hi, I don't want to put
Hello.
too much effort on too much strain on the connection. But I'm curious. I mean, it just sounds like, hey, I'm going to go to Ukraine and help. And so you did, and you are. But to someone like me who is so used to all the bureaucracies about, well, you have to prove who you are, you have to demonstrate you're trustworthy, you've got to show your papers, da 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 da. I mean, how did that even happen?
Carol, I found that I applied for quite a few volunteer and paid jobs when I was stateside. Nothing came about. It was like trying to sandpaper a monkey. Nothing came about. So I determined I was going to leave a very good job in New Mexico, working for the state of New Mexico as a detective for the public defender's office, and go to as close as I could at that point to Ukraine, which was Poland, and help out there just by the same mantra I've had as a reporter, which I used to be, and a detective. You got to go there. You got to go there and say, here I am. And I will give credit to the organization in Poland. They were very rapid. They said, yes, show up here tomorrow at 9.
Wow.
No work, no passport examination, no resume. They said, you want to work? We got lots of work. And they did. Sometimes 10,000 people would come through that railway station in the day, and they needed all kinds of help. They didn't speak languages. I happen to speak a few languages. Every language in the world was in that station, including news crews from Japan and Egypt, from China. There were Nigerian refugees who had been living in Ukraine for years. So it was very polyglot. There were also a large number of Romani families, which were difficult to handle because they would always travel in groups of 20. And it was a challenge to find hotel rooms for them in groups of 20. They didn't want to be separated. And I remember carrying bags over and over again up and down stairs. I blew out both my knees doing that because
Yikes.
there were no elevators there. It's the senior problem, Carol. Someday you'll know what I'm talking about.
Trust me, I know what you're talking about. I was blessed to marry a wonderful man, and we went to Scotland for our honeymoon. But we were idiots traveling. And I was 4.5 months pregnant because we delayed the honeymoon because I was working on my dissertation, blah, blah, blah. And we ended up, again, in Scotland. There are no elevators. And we're carrying these ridiculously huge suitcases upstairs. I felt like an idiot because I didn't know how to travel. So, but okay, it was a wonderful experience. So I'm relating to you about hauling suitcases upstairs.
That did make it challenging. You're right.
Thank you, Frank. More questions, please, from panel and our guests. Please don't be shy. We have absolutely unique case, I think. This is our 99th meeting, 99th week, and I think we have absolutely unique speaker today. Thank you, Frank. And more questions, please. Well, you can. I could ask my own. Yefim, please.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Victor. Not so much a question, but I just want to touch a few points that I kind of have in common with Frank. I was first on Brighton Beach in 1979, when it was not that well internationally known yet. We lived actually near, right? It was not become the Brighton Beach of a real, second Odessa. We also had a fellow refugee friend who lived in Brooklyn, who admired very much Flatbush, especially for its Christmas decorations at the time. Yeah. As far as actual Odessa, I was there in 1968, not for very long, but that was the point where I figured out who should be my companion for the rest of my life, and that's what happened. 30 years later, I took my American-born son, Ben, to Brighton Beach, which was already that famous Brighton Beach. And he was calling his mom on the phone, on the cell phone in Boston, and saying, "Mom, we're having such an ethnic experience here." I have a Ukrainian. I have a Ukrainian teacher in Kiev, Halina, and my impression is that lately there's been more air alarms in Kiev there. But she says basically when she teaches her students, she is a professor, they have to go to the shelter, but when she's in her apartment, she's kind of already used to it, and just kind of regular. I sometimes hear those announcements. She, by the way, taught me a large number of Ukrainian songs, including the one you sang, which is, I believe, is the official anthem. And there's also kind of a second unofficial one, Oi Luzi Chervona Kalina, as well. I don't know if you heard that one as well. He also prompted me to write my travel essays in Ukrainian, which I'm doing right now, to compete with what she says is probably a popular Ukrainian author now, Yuri Andrukhovich. I don't know if you heard that name. So I'm writing.
Yes,
we have a lot of towns that intersect where he has been and I have been, but certainly from a very different perspective. Really a lot of. It was really very pleasant and happy to hear your story and description of Odessa now and what you're doing there. By the way, I've also become an actor for a while. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Victor, you're muted.
Thank you, Fim, for your input. You have a lot. We all have a lot in common here. Again, as I mentioned, from my childhood, I haven't been in Odessa since 1974. I'm sure it has changed tremendously in 40 years. But still, as Frank shows us, it has the same spirit and definitely the resolve not to be defeated. That's what I read from what you are saying. People must be defiant. We have heard this again and again on this podcast, that Odessa is not surrendering.
Correct. Very true.
How long, if I may ask, do you plan to stay?
Because of visa restrictions, I probably have to be heading back pretty soon. I spent 3 months here before, almost 3 months here before, and wanted to come back. And I will keep coming back as long as this war goes on, as long as there's still a need, even after the war ends, because unfortunately, tragically, as we know, it will take years to repair what has been damaged psychologically and physically in this war. And I want to do whatever I can, as long as I can.
Thank you. This is inspiration and support for many. I know that even our small contribution, we are watched not by thousands, but by hundreds. And every drop, like today's show, makes it more important and inspirational for us to continue and to disseminate this information and to educate. Since we do it in English, we direct our podcasts immediately at our students, our professors, the local population in our area. First of all, those who know about us, and worldwide, countrywide. But it is important, as you demonstrate, to teach and to continue educate people about this war, which is not going to stop immediately as much as we would wish it. But any more questions to Frank before we conclude our podcast for this day, please? If I have no more questions from panel or viewers, we would thank you once again from the bottom of our hearts and hope to have you again with us whenever you can, join us we're here every Friday. If you want to watch or just to pitch in a couple of words, we'll be always happy to see you as we do many others. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And please, Katerina, as usual, say a couple of words in Ukrainian to our viewers. We greet everyone from West Virginia. Please.
Yeah, we'll do. But in the meantime, Mr. Hickey, while this war shows us the absolute worst, you represent the absolute best of humanity. Just thank you so much, to echo Victor's word. And now to our Ukrainian viewers. Дорогі браття і сестри в Україні, ми зберігаємо вас у наших щоденних думках і молитвах. Нехай милосердний Бог тримає вас у своїй опіці. До наступного тижня. Прощаємося.
Слава Україні!
Героям
Героям
слава.
слава.
Слава Україні.